So we're planning a debate and discussion about the issues here at Susanna's request. She said she wanted to hear a little disagreement and a variety in opinions. So let's start out. We've been hearing about AI and this notion that this time is different. How many people remember the MOOC revolution that was going to completely change the way K-12 education? And it didn't make it. So maybe start with a question for each of you to answer briefly. Why is this time really different? What fundamentally about the technology could be transformative? Susanna, you want to start? You're on the end.
Oh, okay. Well, I think the ability to generate is one thing, that we didn't have that before, and that really changes how people can interact with it. So it can replace a lot of work. And when I think about the potential benefits of it, I think that we want to get certain kinds of experiences to students because we know those experiences are really helpful for how they learn. But there are these barriers to getting there because they often require lots of work, lots of communication, lots of things like that. The new tools have ability, I think, to reduce these barriers a lot in the way that kind of the traditional approaches had some kinds of benefits clearly, but couldn't really transform this kind of communication and organization in the way that the current tools could if we use them right.
So you want to add anything, Rebecca?
Sure. I think one of the reasons this is really different this time is schools did not invite this technology into their classrooms like MOOCs or other higher ed institutions. It showed up. It's software, kids are accessing it through social media, through gaming platforms, through EdTech, yes. And we really can't forget that kids learn everywhere all the time. And so they're learning with AI outside of school. And I do think this time is really different in terms of us having to build really strong family school partnerships if we want to try to wrap our hands around how to support kids to learn in an age of AI, even more than, say, with a MOOC. I see it more analogous to social media, frankly, where we in the education community were asleep at the wheel. We didn't really talk about it when it rolled out. We sort of ignored it, and it's come back to bite us.
So when you draw a parallel with social media, immediately comes into my brain where all the mistakes we made in social media about not limiting use or putting in safeguards and things like that. So you have to worry about this in the case of AI as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Nirav, how about you? What do you think?
I guess I would start by saying we don't know yet. So this could be MOOC 2.0, and we'll find out over the coming years. I doubt it, but it's possible. I think just zooming out, this might be the most powerful technology that humanity's ever created. And so we should at least have some assumption and curiosity that would have a big impact on education, both on the opportunities and the risks. I think that's just kind of my starting point. This is a very big deal for humanity, and it'll probably be a big deal for education.
Yeah, I agree with you. In fact, 10 years ago, we had a debate at the Google board. What was going to be more important, AI or the internet? And Larry and Sergey said AI, and everybody else on the board said the internet. 5 years later, we had the debate again, and everybody had flipped into the AI thing. So I think you're right. It's a transformative technology. Shantanu?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that, because I think now we're not just transforming education, we're transforming everything, how we work, the economy, every part of that. And I guess, you said you wanted to debate. I'd actually disagree with the premise of the question that education technology hasn't had a transformative impact over the last 10 years. And I say that in the context of what we've seen in terms of what it's done for access, what it's done for personalization. Before I was at Google, I helped start Khan Academy, and one of the things that we've always believed, that personalized learning could be, and that was the dream of the MOOCs. But, I met somebody a couple of years ago who was a girl in Afghanistan who had to drop out of school at the age of 11 because of the Taliban. And she found online learning, she found YouTube, she found Khan Academy, she found online resources. She studied, did well in the SAT, came to ASU, now she's studying quantum computing, doing her PhD in quantum computing. So to me, that is a transformative impact.
No, I agree with you. I think the MOOCs in the developing world have had. I've been to India and seen young children who didn't have a good school environment were not going to learning on MOOCs. So I think particularly
and just to add to that, I think the
US.
big difference now is, I think before that's the unusual story. That's not
Yeah.
the average girl in Afghanistan.
Right.
But I think with AI, that personalization and that access becomes so much more accessible to a lot more people.
Yeah, I think the personalization thing is absolutely right. I mean, the old days, personalization was watch the video again, right? That was until you get it, right? And Sal Khan actually once told me a story. Somebody had to watch a video on linear algebra 16 times, but they got it on the 16th time. So, but we can do better. We can do better. Rebecca, you've written a lot about how education has to change, that we need to rethink how we're educating children for this age of AI. Say something about what you think, what really has to change, and how do we make sure they're learning?
Right. Well, I've been thinking about what the purpose of education is for some time pre-AI, and the best analogy I've most recently come up with is with my co-author, Jenny Anderson. We wrote a book last year called The Disengaged Teen. And really what we were looking at is, why do so many kids hate school? Like, why do they hate school? Kids love learning. They're hardwired to learn. 75% of them say they love school in 3rd grade, and by 10th grade, only 25% of them say they love school. And one of the main sort of conclusions we came to was that for many years, we have operated under an age of achievement. The purpose of school is to rank, sort, and help kids figure out who gets to go to Stanford or who gets to go to other higher ed institutions. And historically, that is really, in every country of the world, industrialized or not industrialized, that is sort of the core spine of schooling. So could we think of a different purpose? And we kept, again, we were doing this study before ChatGPT came out. And so it came out right in the middle of the research. And we thought, well, what we're seeing the fraying nature of the age of achievement in low engagement, in employers saying, I have to spoon feed my young recruits. They need to be told exactly what to do. They can't problem solve, mental health crises, chronic absenteeism, you name it. And we thought, well, really what we need is sort of an education system, a new era, and sort of age of agency, age of student agency. What if education systems really were about helping kids learn how to learn, find their passion, yes, acquire knowledge. You can't I'm especially worried about throwing the baby out with the bathwater with AI on the acquiring knowledge piece, but apply it. And there's lots of creative pedagogies to do it. We just haven't done that at scale, and we do need to reorient how we assess. And AI has a potential. I think assessment is an area that AI has a real potential for opening up.
So Susanna, you've spent your life studying, measuring education, measuring impact, measuring. How do we approach that in this age of AI? Because it seems like we're going to have to rethink a lot of things.
Yeah, so certainly we don't want to kind of, I don't think there's a dichotomy really between just trying things that seem right and also instead using research approaches that we've had forever where you need 5 years to find out any kind of information. But you can really instead engage with what we know and also build learning into what we do. And I think we need both of those things because like in some of these AI chatbots and things like that, the tutors, Conmigo or something like that, where you've seen this great effect in Afghanistan, we also, those are great because we've built in an understanding of some of the learning sciences into it, kind of what kinds of supports do we need, and we need to do more of those kinds of things, but we also know a lot from research that 5%, what do they say, the 5% rule, the 10% rule. You get that many students is a lot when you look around the world, but we don't want to leave out the 95% of other students who aren't going to engage in this. And so we really need to think about the research that's out there that talks about how you engage students, how do you get them to want to be on these platforms. And I think we have a lot of knowledge about that's out there too. So you want to pull that kind of knowledge in. For example, getting an adult to work with them can allow them to work on that platform better. Maybe that adult doesn't need to be with them always, but the adult needs to be there to celebrate the successes the students have, to really motivate and engage them to do it. So the first thing that we want to do is kind of take what we know and apply it. Give them the kinds of experiences they want, and don't make the obvious mistakes that we know that from everything we've done in EdTech that we've been talking about. But the other thing is that we really need to learn more as it goes along. So I will be an advocate for partnerships where we build research into what's going on. If you're rolling out a program into 10,000 schools with 100,000 students, do it in a way where you learn something. You can randomize different parts of it so you know what engages and what doesn't engage students, what helps them get to the next stage, and what doesn't, what makes them disengage. I'm sure we'll talk about, cognitive offloading and the worries about that. So you really want to build that in, and I think you also want to build in measures. As you go along, you want to know what's happening. So you want to do this randomization, and you want to collect kind of implementation measures. Where is this falling off? Or for something like these AI tutors, how can they be used in a classroom in a way that actually engages students in there? So if I were thinking, I would maybe get rid of the 5-year RCTs kind of stuff, but I wouldn't get rid of really, really careful measurement and a lot of A/B testing as you do this.
Which, of course, on the internet, everybody who builds an internet program knows how to do A/B testing and do it and scale it up as you get more and more people in. It's the way that business is run. So I think we should be able to do this.
I think that's right, but it's more than just like what the tool does. You've got to A/B test how you get it to get it to students.
Yes,
well.
yes.
ecosystem.
Which is a more complicated.
It's a little bit more complicated, yeah.
Narav, you're working on AI at Anthropic. What do you think about what does education need to double down on that AI isn't going to do? What's the role, and how do they fit together?
Yeah, I mean, one of the hard things about AI deployment is I think we have strong confidence it'll eventually have big impacts across the society. But in any given year, you don't know exactly what part of society, what's going to hit when. So one thing we think about Anthropic is kind of if-then statements, like if the world looks like this, then we should start changing in this way, but trying to have some humility that we don't know when the ifs will happen. So in education and curriculum, and how we might change, I can kind of think of maybe 3 phases. In the current phase, the world doesn't look that different than it did a couple of years ago. And so I think our main focus should be just using AI tools for the existing curriculum we have. There's plenty of kids who aren't getting reading and math done. Maybe AI can help. And that should just be our focus right now. And I wouldn't call for any radical change. I do think it's likely in the next kind of 2 to 10 years that the economy will start shifting, jobs will start shifting. I don't know that that'll affect elementary and middle schools that much, but it should probably affect high schools and colleges and what they're focusing on. And so as that data comes, I think that's an area where you will want some curricular change. And then, just to be very open and direct, I do think over some period of time, call it decades, the world's going to look radically different, akin to the farmer industrial revolution. And, that changed education a lot. And that's hard to predict, it's hard to know, and so I have less confidence here. But one way, I personally think about it is education has 3 fairly core functions. Turning a kid into a good person, turning a kid into a good citizen, and then turning a kid into a good worker is probably the wrong word, but participating in the workforce. And my hunch is those first 2 things are going to become more important, and the third thing is going to decline in importance a bit when understanding what it means to be a flourishing human and how to participate in a society where maybe humans are doing less labor is going to have profound impacts on education. But I think that's further down the road.
Yeah, it is somewhat ironic that the early impact on jobs appears to be on starting programmers, which is kind of a funny thing. And one of the healthy things is the CS enrollment at Stanford and Berkeley has actually dropped for the first time in 10 years because it was too many students. And what are they doing? They're going to other fields. They're still using computing as a tool. They're using AI as a tool, but they're going to other fields. They're shifting around. Shantanu, this is obviously, as you roll this out, we have to worry about ensure that there's positive human impact, right? That we've got appropriate guardrails, we've got the right kinds of. How do you think about that part of the problem? At the same time, when people are saying we want this technology, how do you balance that?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I focus on is how do we bring this technology to education schools and the schools and institutions, K-12 schools and higher ed institutions? And as a part of that, what we already see is like students are running away with this, right? Like the youth are the earliest adopters. They've moved on, and they're using the technology significantly. So what's critical here is that we figure out how to bring this technology responsibly to empower kind of all the institutions. And as a part of that, I actually do think that's why educators are so critical to this conversation, because they can really guide the right way to use the technology. There's obviously the safety aspects. We want to restrict the persona so people aren't building unhealthy relationships with the technology, particularly for younger users. There's obviously content safety, but also how do we make sure that the technology is pedagogically appropriate, right? It's one thing to do well on competition math exams and score a gold medal on the math Olympiad. It's another thing to be a good teacher and really have those pedagogical attributes to it. So one of the things that we do at Google is we actually benchmark the models against that. We have Learn LM where we're looking at it on whether it's deepening metacognition, whether it's driving active learning. Is it, when we ask it to not give the answer and have the productive struggle, does it do instruction following well there? So I think all of those things are complex problems and you can't do them on your own. I think you have to work with institutions, you have to work with all the people, and it has to be that partnership to bring it correctly and really make sure it's landing appropriately in society.
And do you think we can build guardrails that brilliant young people won't jailbreak somehow and get around? I think they're really smart when it comes to using computing, and often most young people know more than their parents about how to use the technology.
I do think you can, but I think it's not easy. I think there's the point, right? Which is you really need to focus on it. It can't be something where you put a little bit of effort, like, oh, I tested it and it looks pretty good on these, with some of the evals we have. You have to really, because students are pretty good, young people, as you say, are pretty good at finding workarounds on anything that you put out there.
Yeah, and one thing we've seen is AI-produced code sometimes has complex security flaws that we were not aware of if you just look at the code. So there are some challenges we still have to solve. Coming back to Rebecca and Susanna, talk about how do we think about this in the context of if we don't do something. I mean, there's AI as making a positive change, but there's also, well, if we don't engage with it, are we going to be not preparing kids for the new century here?
I think the biggest sort of quandary that parents, educators, experts like all of us are trying to figure out is what's the balance between protect our kids and prepare our kids. Like that is a real tension lived on a daily basis in classrooms, in homes. We just did a big study at the Brookings Institution with a global task force on AI in education. And we were, and Isabel and Glenn and a bunch of other people were on our steering committee. And we were really asking the question, are we on the right track when it comes to K-12 students, learning and development, and generative AI? And ultimately what we found was, no, we are not on the right track. The risks are overshadowing the benefits as it is rolled out today. And part of that is because we, I think, are at risk of like losing the forest for the trees when we focus on very single point, great solutions deployed in one place in one classroom. And you miss the big picture that a lot of kids are spending lots of time with frontier model chatbots that are not designed for kids, are not designed for learning. And you can put, Learn LM next to a Give Me the Answer LM. What kid is going to pick the Learn one and not the Give Me the Answer one? It's not because they're bad or they're lazy. It's just that's how the human brain is wired. So the risks really do come about around unscaffolded, open-ended sort of Gen AI use, largely with chatbots, often outside of school. And there are benefits, real benefits, but it's with narrow AI use. Really, vetted tools, vetted content, embedded in good pedagogy, helping to sort of do things that you couldn't do before. I have a real, and I've become increasingly this way, minimalist mindset when it comes to deploying technology in schools. If you can do it with a paper and pencil or a hug or in person or give a kid a hug or just have a chat, just do that. Like, use the technology for things that are really transformational. It was yesterday, I can't remember where I was, but I think it was yesterday. I was touring, George Mason University has starting to develop AI-embedded VR simulations to train nurses. Fantastic use. They learn the content, they brief, they go in there, they practice. The AI is making this VR simulation incredibly real life. That is a great use of AI to really do something new. So that's where I think we should be focusing our attention.
Yeah, so I don't know if it really matters whether we, get the least technological thing we possibly can in there. I more worry about kind of what we're not providing right now that we should be. And that maybe we can, even before what you need to flourish in life changes, we're not focused schools on what currently kids need to flourish in life. I think there are all sorts of different capacities that are beneficial to you. Even things like getting pleasure out of what you do, that's like a simple one. But I do think there are ones like being creative, coming up with new ideas, critical thinking, of course, we think is important. Being able to persuade something or somebody of something, which we're trying to do now. But we have all these kinds of things, and we haven't really measured them in schools very well. And I think as a result, we haven't worked towards them. And part of the reason we don't measure them is it's really hard to measure them with an assessment. If you're thinking about something like coming up with an idea, you have to measure that over a long period of time because you don't come up with an idea, in the 10 minutes you have to take this assessment. So if we could have kind of more ambient information that's out there that isn't necessarily summative, but provides us an ability to help students learn towards outcomes that really help them flourish in life, I think we would be kind of so much better. And I think there are a number of things like that. Like for high school students, I think there's this great potential of career and technical education and apprenticeships, or at least project-based learning, to be much more engaging than it is now. But part of the problem is that it's really complicated to do that well. And so there are a couple of places that do that well, but most, it's worse than, just being in a classroom and hearing stuff. So as a result, we don't do it very much. But if we could get over those barriers by kind of, again, to the measurement, like if we could measure when a student in apprenticeship was doing something that demonstrated they were developing skills, or they were slacking off and not doing anything, and we could go in and say, well, what about if you made this effort? I really think we could, even in the world we're in now, make huge progress. And I don't really care if a student is using an LLM or they're using paper or whatever it is, if we are thinking about whether they're getting these kind of experiences and capacities that they need to flourish.
So that's a really great question, because that's what we really want to make sure, that they have critical thinking skills. Nerve, how do we deal with that? How do we prevent them from just using the tool to get the answer without doing the hard thinking, without doing the critical analysis?
That's definitely a risk. I think a lot of kids are cheating on a lot of things right now.
Or being strategic.
adults.
Or being
Efficient.
strategic. Like, who wouldn't use it? Like,
I'm definitely worried about the amount of cheating that's going on. My hunch is like the thing that prevents cheating is good assessments. And so I'll just throw out a curiosity. Like Oxford and Cambridge, they did oral exams. Like you go in, you talk to your professor, and then they tell you if you got the material or not. I think AI will allow you to scale oral exams. So just as a little side project at Anthropic, now that anybody can build an app, I'm an English major and very non-technical, and I created my own oral examiner app where you could just upload a PDF and then Claude would just start asking you questions, and I gave Claude a little rubric and then it would grade you. And I did it, and it gave me a 3.6 out of 5, and that felt about right. And so, I don't know, my hunch is if you get the assessment right, that'll be the way to get cheating down, and I think there's a lot of cool ways to do assessments. I'll throw out one more anecdote. At the end of every week, I ask Claude, how good of a thinker does it think I was over the past week? And it goes over all our conversations, and it tells me where I've done well and not well.
Wow.
And it usually stings sometimes, but often insightful. So yeah.
And do you change because of that?
Oh yeah. I
Like
care what it thinks about
the
me.
following week, do you like think about how to
You know, it's
improve?
gradual, but and I guess too early to tell. There's no RCT on Europe's interactions.
But there could be.
There could be.
There could be.
We had an A/B test.
Exactly.
One didn't ask and the other
Yeah.
asked.
The problem is, you can't do this by natural experiment because it's all new technology. So you can't look back and say,
No,
"Ah,
right. You just-
you're going to have to do it from ground zero."
Yeah, but you do need, you do know some things. And for example, I wouldn't go initially to assessments. I would go to humans. I would say that's how we make it good, is we build it into interactions. And that's how we know if it's, that's how we make it so kids don't cheat.
You know, I was thinking about something I said to my son and to my granddaughter. Reading is a superpower. Do I have to now say AI? Knowing how to use AI is the new superpower?
Additional.
Additional.
I mean, but
I
it's
hope
true.
they can still read.
But it's true, like domain expertise, higher level cognitive, critical thinking, you do a lot more with AI. And you ask poor questions and formulate things poorly, you get not so much. So I'm actually quite worried about a new layer of cognitive stratification.
I want them to understand the tools. I don't want to turn them all into prompt engineers,
Yes,
though, right?
exactly.
That's the thing we don't want to do. Shantanu, talk about the role. How do you think about this from a role of industry, of a company, as we roll out this technology? And I'm sure Nirav will have some thoughts about this too. I mean, how do you think about their role in doing this right and ensuring that we make progress? I mean, Notebook LM is great. I mean, I love it. It's amazing to just do things. And you just take a 30-page, very dense scientific paper and you get a summary of it that you can read, actually, and understand. So
Yeah, and I think, and I guess going back to the thing of like, are students cheating or not, is that efficiency? Like, if you didn't read that and you turn, people used to say YouTube, is that efficiency, or maybe I should have read the full chapter? And I think what you have to recognize is the technology is changing this. There's an important part of learning that is the productive struggle. Everybody's going to try to take the shortest path, the same way. Like, I'm not going to go down the road that has all the traffic that's going to give me a headache. I'm going to take the quickest path, and people are doing that. That's human behavior, and we can't fault students for following human behavior. What we have to do is make sure that the paths they're taking are actually going to give them the skills that they need. And I think that's where it really does go into how do we ensure that the experiences that are happening in the classroom are around that. And I think, from an industry standpoint, what I'm interested in, because this is technology, it's a general purpose, technology, and it can be used for great good, and it can also be used incorrect. It's like fire. You can use it to cook, you can use it for war. And with something like this, you really do have to identify the benefits, right? Like, what are the ways we empower the educator? We already see that they're running away with it also. We had a pilot in Northern Ireland where they're saving 10 hours a week of time. So they're embracing it, but how do we make sure that we're giving them the tools? Because this change is happening. And if you just leave the system as it is, you're gonna have all these negative effects. We have to empower the educators to adapt for this new world.
yeah.
I think one message, if I can give to all the builders and amazing people in this room, is the technology's, I think, about there, but we don't yet have the product right. And so what would be amazing, I think, and transformative from AI is if in a couple of years we had a AI tutor that worked with most kids most of the time, most subjects, that we had it well researched, and that it didn't degrade on mental health or disempowerment or all these issues we've talked on. And I think if we can crack that, which seems very real, possible that we should, then it'll just be amazing. And I think it'll have a chance to be one of the more equitable interventions we've ever had. So I'm generally bullish that AI will reduce educational inequality. The things that work the most in education are a great teacher or a great tutor, and those are just notoriously hard to scale here in America, and particularly global. And so if we can get an AI tutor that's approaching what a human does, I think that will be amazing for reducing educational inequality, but we just don't have that product yet. So I do think that is like the one thing that we don't have that we need. But if we can get there, I think great things will happen.
I think we can. I mean, we do have it for limited context, right? We have it for introductory programming through Code in Place, right? So tens of thousands of people around the world are learning to code using these AI tutors. We've got to get it broad-based, though, so they can handle a wide variety of things.
I worry much less about getting an incredible product like that, and much more about how are our systems going to absorb them?
Yeah.
Our learning systems in and out of school. Because, that is actually where I think we often go off the rails.
So, Rebecca, this is a perfect segue because that leads to my silver bullet question. I'm giving you each a silver bullet to solve or knock out one barrier, one system-level problem that's going to become the bottleneck in getting this technology out there. Susanna, what are you going to go after?
Okay, so I'll go after measurement. I think we have to measure other things besides what we measure now, and we have to measure them kind of continuously so that they can be formatively used. And with that, I'll just get into this one thing about the tutor. I spend most of my time thinking about tutoring.
I was like, you're not saying tutoring?
I love tutoring. I love tutoring like more than anything. But nonetheless, I think that's a very small part of what education is. I think you learn some things individually and they're factual, but that a lot of what you learn through interacting with people and creating things and going back and forth. So I think we've got big barriers to getting to those kinds of educational experiences, students, which also could use AI tools. You can use AI tools to better schedule when adults meet with students and to better and more flexibly schedule where students go. So that would be one. Or just our human resource system in general could be better done so that we can get these kind of exciting, beneficial experiences to students. So while I think measurement is kind of at the heart of it, and that's the one I'd like to overcome, I do think we have to overcome the idea that education is just like feeding information at the right level to students, because that is just, it's one important part of what we do, but not the main thing.
Yeah. Rebecca.
I second that.
Okay.
So I'm cheating. I'm doing a comment. I'm doing a comment on the tutoring, the pro. That this is what Susanna says is exactly what I meant about how education systems absorb technology. This is just a mere anecdote, but I was talking to somebody who was working at a large corporation in the HR department with a lot of people who spend a lot of time in front of computers, and said, we have a big morale problem. There was a lot of engineers, and they'd rolled out AI, and I said, what's the issue? And they said, well, the engineers are increasingly lonely because now when they have a question, they just ask ChatGPT or whatever they're using. They don't go and ask their colleague for help. And I just want us to all remember that, because that is a bit your point. Like, yes, a great tutor for each kid, but how are we going to absorb that? We don't want them just sitting there with their little AI tutor all day long, right? That's just a slice of how they would spend their time, because that's not how kids develop. But the one thing I think that I would try to tackle is really helping educators shift their pedagogy and support them, give them access to the tools, let them lead, and really help them get into this explorer mindset where they can, decide when not to use it and when to lean into it. I think that pedagogical shift is going to be our biggest hurdle.
Maybe one, this is great to go back and forth. I don't think I'm worried too much. I agree that adoption and absorption could go well or not well. Or could be efficient or not efficient. But I do think if it's a truly amazing product, it will happen. And so I can't particularly...
That's what I'm worried about. That if it's so amazing, it will happen and will close down some of the sort of social interactions.
Got it. Well, that goes to my silver bullet.
Okay, great.
So I do think my silver bullet would be, I wish it was easier to start new schools, and particularly new public schools in the United States. Because I think starting a new school is an easier way to figure out what the AI human curriculum school day should look like. And I think we just need a lot of experimentation to figure that out. And I think new schools are the best way to do that.
But that's a very big silver bullet because you'd have to start a lot of new schools. So
Maybe I should be more narrow. The new schools will figure out the thing that then everybody else.
Everybody
can
else will.
adopt.
Okay.
It's
good.
just a way to get to the
Good.
answer quicker.
Good. Well, that's a great idea. I mean, you have
Like
a
Yes.
experimental, right? You have the point of the arrow doing the work to really discover what really works. That's a great idea. Shante.
Yeah, I'd actually agree with Rebecca on like the training, supporting educators is critical. And I think it goes back, I mean, your first question about MOOCs didn't disrupt higher ed. I would actually say like, when you think about this, remember what's gonna stay the same in education. We talk a lot about the change, but what stays the same is education is about the social experiences of the humans in the room. At its core, when I send my kids to school, it's not about consumption of information. It's about the mentorship from the teachers, the social experience. Higher ed, it's about the campus experience. Like, that is what education is about. That's not going to change. So what we have to do is we have to really help support the educators so that they can refine their craft in this new world where all these things are changing. When when your assignments no longer make sense because you can just use agentic AI and complete all of them in a minute, like what is the new experience? And that really does get back to the cores will stay the same, right? I think it is going to be the discussion, it's going to be the critical thinking, it's going to be all those things that make humans humans. And how do we really support educators through that transformation moment so that they can embrace the technology and use it to their benefit so it's actually driving that critical thinking as opposed to being stuck in the old system where students are just bypassing them along the way.
Right. It's augmentation, not replacement of the teacher and the teacher's role.